العفو فاعف عنا اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه يكافئ مزيدا. يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك. سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. فلك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد رضا. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في كل وقت وحين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد حتى ترث الأرض ومن عليها أنت خير الوارثين. نويت تعلم تعليم وتذكر التذكير ونفع انتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وبسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم ودعاء الهدى ودلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. قال الإمام محمد بن إسماعيل البخاري رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا بي وبكم في الدارين آمين في باب أمور الإيمان وقول الله تعالى وبه قال حدثنا عبد الله بن محمد قال حدثنا أبو عامر العقدي قال حدثنا سليمان بن بلال عن عبد الله بن دينار عن أبي صالح عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم قال الإيمان بضع وستون شعبة والحياة شعبة من الإيمان. We're in the chapter, which is the third chapter of Imam Bukhari's work upon faith, Kitaab Imaan, and he entitles this third chapter Bab Umur al-Iman, the chapter as it concerns the affairs of faith. And again, radiallahu anhu wa he anchors the title of his chapter with a verse from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inside of both Surah Al-Baqarah as well as Surah Al-Mu'minun. The first verse, لَيْسَ الْبِرْ أَن تَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ قِبَلَ الْمَشْرِقِ وَالْمَغْرِبِ, which we looked at inshallah ta'ala this morning. What we sort of ascertained is that bir here is a term that is synonymous. It's a term that is vast in its signification. The actual term bir, the lughat al-Arab, in the language of the Arabs, it alludes to ittisa', it alludes to that which is vast, the term bir. And that's one of the reasons why you call land bar, from the same term barara in the Arabic language. Bar is land due to its vastness. And bir, likewise, it indicates piety or righteousness because of its vastness. It's all-encompassing nature as it relates to that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislates from good. And each and every single one of us should desire to be from those people at the very least who are from the people of Abrar, like we just recite the people of Bida. The Abrar they're known as we recited inside of Surah Al-Waqi'ah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He divides the people of Khair, the people of Salah, into two groups. He divides them into the Muqarrabuna, and He divides them Jalla fil Ula into Ashabul Yameen. And the Ashabul Yameen here are the Abrar. They're called the people of Bir, the people of Bir. Those who encompass goodness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated upon the tongue of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And thereafter the indication of Imam Al Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, again in his beginning, Imaan yazid wa yanqus, that faith increases and likewise faith decreases. It's from bir we should increase the qurb in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. we should become of those who draw ever closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such that we become from the people of taqarrub ilayhi, the muqarrabun, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. And goodness is always relative, as we mentioned with the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, wal akhiratu khayrun laka min al-ula, that the next is better for you than the prior, than the former. And the ulama understand that in the ahyan of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the moments of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that each subsequent moment is better than each previous moment for the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, such that from a perspective he is irrecognizable to himself sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, astaghfirullah, such that I seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 100 times. Hakada, the believer should always be in a permanent state of taraqi, maraqi zulfa, those ladders of ascension that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places for the slave, spiritual ladders of ascension that Allah ta'ala places for the slave, so that He ascends them unto Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. In each and every single moment we should be trying and endeavoring for our post moment to be better than our previous moment. Always an increase. Look at the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says that any day in which I do not increase in proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may Allah bless that day. Look at the dua of the Rasul. He's making dua against the day in which he doesn't increase in proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hakada Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And likewise we have to be. That's why the Imams radiallahu anhu, the relativity of good, that's why the Imams radiallahu anhum were done when the people of taqarrub ila Allah ta'ala, when they look back as to how they were, when they were from the people of Bir, or Bir is khair, the Imams radiallahu anhum were done, they say, Hasanat al-abrar, Sayyi'at al-muqarrabina, that the good deeds of the people of Bir are the evil deeds of the people of Qurb. It's all relative. And so when you become from the people of taqarrub ila Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you look back at the good that you did, and you see that good, it's just tantamount to veils. Often it veils a slave. Many of us, we can pray, and our prayer can be a veil. Many of us, we can give in sadaqah to Allah ta'ala, and our sadaqah can be a veil. Many of us, we can fast lillah, but our fast can be a veil. Hajj, and our hajj can be a veil. Like our teachers call these hujub nuraniya. These are veils of light. Light in that they're good. Veils in that they prevent you from that which is beyond you. And we should never allow anything to veil you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing, nada. Nothing should veil you from Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. You should always be seeking Him subhanahu wa ta'ala in each and every single moment. Bir, tantamount to Iman. And so just as you want to be from the abrar, that you're launching pad to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, likewise also you want to be from the mu'mineen. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Imam Al Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala bring it the beginning of the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will elucidate the 10 character traits of the people of Iman. The people of Iman inside of Surah Al-Mu'minun. Imam Al Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, herein he brings the tradition on the authority of Abdullah ibn Muhammad, who said that he brings on the authority of Abu Amir al-Aqdari. Bismillah.
Abdullah ibn Muhammad related to us, Abu Amir al-Aqidi related to us, Sulaiman ibn Bilal related to us, on the authority of Abdullah ibn Dinar, on the authority of Abu Salih, on the authority of Abu Huraira, on the authority of the Prophet, may the prayers and peace of God be upon him, who said, faith is 70 odd branches and modesty is a branch of faith.
On the authority of Abu Huraira, on the authority of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, although there was a bit of silence there, we have good opinion that everybody inside of their heart or under their breath, they were saying sallallahu alaihi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, al-bakhil, man dhukirtu indahu wa lam yusalli alayya. That the miser, hakada definition of nubuwwah, of prophecy, that the miser is the one who hears be mentioned and does not say sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. How would it then be? And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said every time he was mentioned he'd have to give a pound or 10 pounds or 100 pounds. Then we'll understand misers. It's a word. There's some breath that comes from your internal that manifests through your manipulation of it into sound that is beautiful and beloved in the Rabb with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قال أبو هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. The hadith is related here on the authority of the great Imam of the Sahaba رضي الله تعالى عنه والراسين أبو هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه. وكثير من الصحابة, many of the Sahaba, they are more often known by their kunya. A kunya in the Arabic language is a name that begins with Abu or it begins with And so whenever you have a name that begins with Abu or that in the Arabic language, you call a kunya. And it is sunnah. Our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam has a kunya. He took to a kunya sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, and his kunya is peculiar and particular to him. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, sammi bi ismi wa la tukanni bi kunyati. Call yourself by my name, but do not assume my kunya. The Prophet ﷺ said his kunya being Abu Qasim, the eldest of his sons, of his children, ﷺ, Qasim. And so the Prophet ﷺ is known as Abu Qasim. And each and every single one of us, inshallah ta'ala, that we should endeavor to take a kunya. And regardless of whether we have children or whether we don't have children, because the kunya does not just relate to you having a child, although more often it relates to you having a child. But there are many from the Sahaba radiallahu anhum wardahum who their kunya does not relate to children, like Abu Bakr, Bakr doesn't relate to a child. Like Abu Huraira doesn't relate to a child. And even like the younger brother of Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik, radiallahu anhu, was drawing the famous tradition, tawatur inside of Sahih Al Bukhari, where the Prophet enters upon the young brother of Sayyidina Anas, radiallahu anhu, and he has a beard that has died. And so the Prophet addresses him, Ya Aba Umair, ma fa'ala nukhayl. Oh Abu Umair, what did the little beard do? The Prophet said. And of the things that the Imams radiallahu anhum were done, extrapolate from the tradition of the Imams, from that simple Jami' al-Kalim of the Prophet ﷺ, there are Imams who extrapolated over 300 different legal rulings. Of them, over 500 legal rulings radiallahu ta'ala anhum were done from that simple statement of the Rasul, Ya Aba Umair ma fa'ala nukhayl. And from amongst the things they extrapolated from it, deduced from it, is the permissibility of a child having a kunya. Okay? This is one of the great kunyas of the Sahaba here, due to the grandiose nature of this Imam, Abu Huraira, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. Sure, the Imams, radiallahu anhu warda, bil jazm, with certainty, radiallahu anhu warda, they couldn't tell you what his real name was. So the ulama said, أكثر من 20 قول, more than 20 different opinions as to what his name was. But you're not going to find two of them in what his kunya was. Abu Huraira radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Although what dominates is that his name was Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And he's from the tribe of Dos. And we mentioned the Imam because he's the most prolific. And inshallah ta'ala, we look inshallah ta'ala at the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. Although what is really beautiful about reading Bukhari, Muslim and the Imams radiallahu anhu is when you immerse yourself in the rijal of the religion. To study the sanad of the religion in and of itself, mashallah, tabarakallah, because the ahadith in question, the abwab that Imam Al Bukhari you go with, radiallahu anhu, you'll find it mutajassad inside of these rijal, embodied by the rijal in and of itself. And the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately yu'raf bil rijal. It's known through such men, such great men, mashallah, tabarakallah. For amongst them, saying Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. Yamani, he's from the Yemen radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. In particular, he's from a clan of the Yemen that is known as Dos. It's a very, very famous clan that is known as Dos. Yani radiallahu ta'ala anhum warda. And Dos has those that they attain the dua of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa when the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, Allah mehdi Dos. Oh Allah, guide those. Hakada the dua of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa when the Sahaba were asking the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa to curse those, il'anhum, curse them, O Messenger of Allah. Hakada the Sahaba were. Why? Because the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi sent unto those saying Mu'adh ibn Jabal, the Jabal of the Sahaba. He sent unto those Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, Abdullah ibn Qais. He sent unto those saying Khalid ibn Walid. Those, they refused to enter into the fold of Islam. And so the Prophet said to the Sahaba are telling the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Ya Rasul, ila'an those. Just curse those. La'an bu'ad min rahmatillah. It's desire from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to distance human beings from His mercy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, وَرَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ, that my mercy encompasses, embraces everything and everybody. And so here the actual dua of the companions of the talab, the actual desire of the companions from the Prophet khilaf al-nubuwah, that it contradicts nubuwah. And that's why the Prophet he says, as related inside of Sahih Muslim, the Prophet he says, مَا بُعِثْتُ لَعَانًا, I was not sent as a la'an, as one who curses. Okay. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, we only sent you as a rahmah. sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, ma bu'ithtu la'anan walakinnani bu'ithtu da'iyan wa rahma, but I was sent as a da'i, as one who summons unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, invites into the way of Allah ta'ala, wa rahma, and as a mercy, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, Allah mahdi those, oh Allah, guide those. And from the great Imams that he made from those, mashallah, tabarakallah, and he would usually consider the greatest of the Imams of those, is Sayyidina Abu Hurairah Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhar, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. And he comes to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam in the 7th year after the Hijrah. 7th year after the Hijrah. And in 3 years he's going to spend with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And despite the paucity of years, as an example, Abu Hurairah, 3 years. Abu Bakr, 23 years. So despite the paucity of years that Abu Hurairah spends with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Abu Hurairah is the most prolific of those who narrate traditions on behalf of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in his estimation, ahfadh, that he is the most prolific in memorizing the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. The opinion of Sayyidina Abu Hurairah is only one of the Imams of the Sahaba who could compete with him in that regard. And that is Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Amr ibn As radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. But Abu Hurairah said, al-farq bayni wa baynahu, he said the difference between me and Abdullah is that Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda would memorize just as I would memorize. But Abdullah would also write down the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ adhina lahu. The Prophet ﷺ gave him permission. We don't have anybody else who's given permission to write down the words of the Prophet ﷺ other than the great Abdullah ibn Amr radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He himself, he said, I used to write down every single word that the Prophet ﷺ said. Every word, I used to write everything down. He said, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And then Quraysh, issues of doubt, whether it comes from seen forces or unseen forces, Quraysh then came to me and said, Shuf Kaif, how is it that you write down the word of this man? And this man, and he's saying like this man, he gets angry, he's happy and he's sad, he has emotions. And the nature of emotions, they skew words. Quraysh are trying to say to Abdullah ibn Amr. And so Abdullah ibn Amr, Quraysh affect him. He says, so I stopped writing the words of the Prophet ﷺ, and I went unto the Rasul ﷺ, and I informed the Prophet ﷺ as to what Quraysh had said. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Uktub ya Abdullah, write, O Abdullah, la yakhruj min hada illa haqqa. Only truth comes out of this. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. You better believe that, isn't it? Only truth comes out of the mouth of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. You better believe it. That's from the dictates of faith. That the Prophet is telling you, telling I, that only truth comes out of his mouth sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. No matter how remote whatever he says may seem to you, it is truth. هكذا سيدنا سهل بن حنيف رضي الله عنه صحيح البخاري, he makes mention اتهموا آراءكم. Don't find a fault in what the Prophet ﷺ has said. Find a fault in your own perception. هكذا سهل بن حنيف in al-Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala says. Because the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, like the Quran, it can be a slippery slope for some. You're going to find words, verses inside of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that could bring about inside of your heart doubt in the book of Allah ta'ala. Or likewise, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam can say words, can say words, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and you can be like, cave, cave. Like the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in Bukhari, if a fly falls inside of your drink, the Prophet says, push it right in, push it in, submerge it inside of the drink. He says, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, because the dawa, you see, in terms of the poison, as well as the healing, the antidote for it, the Prophet says, in one wing is the what? Is the da. That's the what? The poison. Whereas in the other wing is the dawa. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And you, and that's not you were good in it, but we're just saying you in general, the doubting Thomases, as they would call them, they were like, what, you reckon? Inside of one wing there's like a poison, and inside of the other wing there's what? The antidote for it. لا يخرج من هذا إلا حق إلا حق. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam said, and it khalas. Then the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam telling you, he said to the Sahaba, do you know where the sun goes each and every single maghrib? Like where the sun goes each and every single maghrib? Where the sun goes somewhere each and every single maghrib. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, it goes beneath the arsh, the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَيَسْجُدْ لِلَّهِ, and it makes sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you doubting Thomas, you reckon like the sun goes right beneath the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and yasjud lil-Rabb, la yakhruj min hadha illa al-haqq. The only thing that comes out of the mouth of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is what? Is that which is what? Truth. It's truth. It's reality. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. The Imams, they mention about the ulama, the rijal, they make mention of al-sinatul haqq fil ard. That they're the tongues of God, the tongues of the real upon the face of the earth. فَكَيْفَ بِرَسُولِ اللَّهِ. Then how about the Messenger of God, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam? We do well to try to approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His word, through the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Shahr Ramadan, Shahr al-Quran, to approach Allah ta'ala through His word, نتقرب إليه, and to learn the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and embrace them as they come unto us. Likewise, the words of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, to approach Allah Jalla Jalaluhu wa ta'ala azamatuh through the actual words of the Rasul. From the Imams of the Salaf, that they would not recite a hadith of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, save that they're in tahara. In tahara. Okay? Words of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, al-Tahir al-Mutahhir sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And look, shuf, the kalam of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Ya Aba Umayr ma fa'ala al-Nukhay. The hadith we refer to is Imam Al Bukhari. The Prophet is saying this to a little boy who got a dead bird in front of him sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Like, Ya Aba Umayr ma fa'ala al-Nukhay. And you don't think that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam rehearsed that moment. Like some of us, you know, like with Wabis ibn Ma'bad there, he's trying to rehearse the moment. He's like, I'll ask the Prophet, I'll ask him, I'm going to ask him what shall I present it. Some people rehearse the moment. The Prophet just walks in, Ya ba'umayr ma fa'ala al-Nukhay. Yani khalas tilqa'iyan, from that great and grand soul, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Look at from the things you extrapolate from that. Look, he called him Abu Umayr. His name wasn't Abu Umayr. The Prophet calls him Abu Umayr at that point in time. And the Umayr in the Arabic language, from the word Umar, life. Umayr, tasghir, it's a diminutive. What it means? Short life. Shuf, kala. What is the mawqif about death? The baby's gonna die here. The baby's dead. What is the Prophet telling the child from where he perceives not? Your life is going to be very short. You're going to die soon after this. And so it comes to pass. Look at the kalam of the Rasul هكذا صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم لا يخرج من هذا إلا الحق رضي الله تعالى عنه وارضاه. And Abu Hurairah, mashallah, tabarakallah, he was blessed to gather the haqq of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. He used to say radiyallahu anhu warḍah, and when he used to enter the majlis of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, kuntu ansa, I used to forget a lot of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so he complained to the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and so the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam told him, yafrush rida. In the jalsa, the majlis, the Prophet tells him to what? To take his rida, to take his cloak there, and to what? To spread it out. Okay, by the end of the majlis, after the Prophet was finished speaking, the Prophet told him, now gather it, khalas, and take it. And so we gathered it and he took it, radiallahu anhu, Abu Hurairah, radiallahu anhu warḍah. He said from that moment on, he never forgot a single statement, not even a harf, not a letter that came out of the mouth of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Jami' radiallahu anhu warḍah, of the kalam of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم, and the Imam of the highest caliber, appointed by the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, as the Imam of Suffah, the Imam of Jiran Rasulillah, as those neighbors of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's the Imam, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu warḍah, and the Imam is meant to say it, but on the basis of the servitude of those who live inside the mosque of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he has proximity to the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. We know proximity to the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. For people of ta'alluq, for people who have attachment and connection to the world, proximity to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam can be really difficult. Hakada the Prophet even tells Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha warḍaha, that if you want, quote unquote, me, then you have to divorce the world. You have to reject that world. And life in the house of Nubuwwah, life in the neighborhood of Nubuwwah can be a very, very difficult life. Now, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu will tell us, like Imam Al-Tirmidhi wants to interpretate the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam's hal, the state of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam as it relates to the dunya, and the essence of the dunya, the essence of how we relate to the dunya as we find out inside of Ramadan is with food and drink. And so hakada is the Prophet ﷺ's hal as it relates to food and drink when Abu Hurairah anhu warḍah. And what's ghareeb is Tirmidhi uses this tradition through Abu Hurairah to explain the hal of the Prophet ﷺ. There's not a single mention of the Rasul ﷺ inside the tradition. That I used to find myself inside of the rawdah of the Prophet ﷺ, between his mimbar and the house of Aisha. And I see, radiallahu anhu warḍah, I'd be rolling around in the dirt of the rawdah. Abu Hurairah anhu warḍah says, وَجَاءَنِي جَائِ, and then somebody would come unto me and they would place their foot upon the back of my neck. ظن بي جنون. They thought I'd gone crazy. وما بي جنون. And I hadn't gone crazy. ما هو إلا الجوع. It would only be hunger that he suffered from. هكذا جيران رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Abu Hurairah anhu warda, he said, in order for me to stand, I would have to use the earth to stand. That's how weak he said, I'd have to use the ground just to stand up. Due to weakness, he would say, radiallahu anhu warda, arbut ala al-batni, that I would tie to my stomach stones. هكذا Abu Hurairah anhu warda. والغريب يعني, what is strange if you understand the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu comes unto the Prophet ﷺ when the Prophet ghaib an Medina is outside of Medina in Khaybar. The Prophet is in Khaybar. Abu Hurairah, look at his memory, he said, I even remember who he prayed behind. He comes to Medina, the Prophet was in Medina to Munawwara. And in the first rak'ah, the first prayer I prayed, first rak'ah, they recited Surah Al-Maryam. Second rak'ah, they recited Surah Al-Mutaffifin. Abu Hurairah, he mentions his first prayer inside the Medina to Munawwara. Sure. Remember the first time we prayed in Medina? For those who've been to Medina, what did the Imam recite in the first rak'ah? That's what Medina means to you. What did the Imam recite inside of the second rak'ah? Araftum. Okay. Because you know the nature of the things about sound. You know one of the reasons why Quran has sound. Why even in the language of the Arabs, the way the Prophet my sound is tone. The Prophet has a tonal language. So there's like a tone to the way he speaks. Just like there's a tone to the way you recite the Quran. One of the reasons being, for the Arabs who are oral people, he's the one who sent amongst the oral people a messenger, the oral people, that their memory is inside of their words. And what helps them in their memory is a tone. It helps preserve memory. Araftum. And so you know, shuf, kalam, I know the some could maybe relate to this kalam, Bilal can relate to it. You know back in the day when you were in Mali there, you know back in the day, you know some tunes that you heard? Isn't it? When you hear that tune, you can remember where you were, innit? You can remember what you were doing. You can remember a lot of things when you hear the song. You smiling there, isn't it? There is khalas. Sometimes you hear a song and you can remember everything about what you were doing when you heard that song or where you first heard that song. So what about the book of Allah Ta'ala? You know, when you were in Medina to Munawwara and you heard the Quran being recited, that should evoke your presence inside of the great city. That should evoke your proximity to the great Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, which is proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. كذا يعني ما شاء الله Abu Hurairah رضي الله عنه وارضاه, he teaches about those who were truly raised by the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But gharib, what is strange, is Abu Hurairah comes to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam at Khaybar. You understand Khaybar? Khaybar, quote unquote, the Imam say, quote unquote, the fortunes of Medina shift at Khaybar. You know, from what we can call sort of radical poverty to radical wealth. Yani. That's what Khaybar yani, signals. And so, quote unquote, the context of the Islam of Abu Hurairah is inside of radical wealth. Yani. Araftum, but they do not take to it. Dunya is toxic. Yani. Hakada, yani, I know it's not for us, isn't it? Dunya, yani, khalas. Araftum, we look at dunya in a different type of way. Yani. But the eye of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with which the Rasul sees the dunya, inna Allah ma nadhara ila dunya mundu an khalaqaha. The Prophet says, verily Allah does not gaze at the dunya since he created it. Allah Ta'ala does not have an eye for the dunya whatsoever. And so inside the context of radical wealth, the Sahaba, in imitation of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, reject in the most absolute and radical way, radiallahu anhu warda. Yarbut, yani kayf, how is it? Sure, any one of us, like raise your hand really, raise your hand that you experience hunger to the point that you're in a state of delirium. Not only that you're feeling delirious, but when someone looks at you, you think, my man gone mad, yani. I don't think, Allah, maybe some of us have had a life, isn't it? Some of us have had a life, that's admitted, yani. Some of us have had a life, but most of us, we haven't had that type of life. When last did one of us go rummaging around the streets of Oldham looking for a rock big enough to tie to our stomachs? Yani, due to radical hunger, yani. When last, yani? And it's like we have no context for that. But it's in that context the greatest of all of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's people are born. From amongst them, Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. Sure, okay. kufr. Some of us don't experience kufr. Abu Hurairah, he tells us about his mother, who was with him inside of Medina to Munawwara, but his mother was not Muslim. Radiallahu anhu warda. And he said once he's sitting with his mother, and his mother, she allowed, look, his words was, she allowed me to hear something about the Prophet ﷺ that I disliked. I mean, she spoke about the Prophet in a bad way. She was a mushrik, Abu Hurairah, radiallahu anhu warda says. Abu Hurairah does, shuf, he cries. And he cries. His mother says something about the Rasul ﷺ that so affects Abu Hurairah, Becca. Not just does he cry, he cries and he cries and he cries. And he leaves the house crying. And he goes all the way to the Prophet ﷺ, he's just crying to the Rasul ﷺ that his own mother had spoken about the Prophet ﷺ in an untoward way. Let's make dua for her. And then the Prophet looks like, Allah mahdi those. Oh Allah guide those. Oh Allah guide the mother of Abu Hurairah. Guide the mother of Abu Hurairah. And so Abu Hurairah khalaf hakada. That stops the actual tears of Abu Hurairah. So Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu warda, he returns back home. He said when he gets home, he's left the house of the Rasul. Gets back home, he said, Urid ubashir ummi. I want to give my mother the glad tidings that the Prophet made dua for her. He said, I get home and the door is ajar. And so Abu Hurairah said, I want to enter, I can hear water inside of the house. And then my mother, who can hear me at the door, my mother says, be where you're at, stay there, stay there, stay there. Okay, after a while, he said, my mother opens the door, and I see my mother now, she's dressed, his mother is dressed. And then my mother says, I want to say something to you. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Shuf, kala. Look at the dua. La yakhruj min hadha illa al-haq. That's that comes out of the mouth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What does Abu Hurairah do? Yabki. Starts to cry again. Starts to cry once again to Abu Hurairah. He said, the first time I was crying out of sadness. Now I'm crying out of happiness. Hakada Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. And what a beautiful space to be in, huh? With anything that's sort of, your memory ain't working too well, unto Rasulullah. Your mother mentioned in the Prophet in an untoward way, unto Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Even in terms of the hadith of Sayyidina Abu Hurairah, even if you're struggling with food, Abu Hurairah said, I'm walking in Medina to Munawwara. At a time nobody walks in Medina. And he says, radiallahu anhu, there I find some of the Sahaba, some of Ahlul Sufra likewise in the streets of Medina. I said, Ma ja'a bikum? And what are you doing here in the streets of Medina at this time? They said, Ju', hunger, we're all hungry. Hey, khalas. I've got a connection to Rasulullah. Let's go to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so we said, we all go to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, Ma ja'a bikum? What are you all doing at my house at this time of the night? He said to the Rasul, Ju', ya Rasulullah, Ju', we are hungry. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam called for a plate of dates. He had a plate of dates. Sure, and here's the context. So the Prophet ﷺ gave each man 2 dates. 1, 2. 2 dates. Sure, 2. That's it, yani. And after when it's going to suffice them, mashallah, tabarakallah. Not just that it's dates, and although dates are superfoods of the Muslim, but because it's from the hand of Muhammad. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. So they all get 2 dates, 1 for you, 2 for you, 1 for you, 2 for you. They all get 2 dates and they start eating the dates, mashallah, or yashba. And they all become satiated by 2 dates. Abu Hurairah, he scrams 1 and then he keeps the other. Ya Abu Hurairah. And then the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, Mabika ya Abu Hurairah. And what is wrong with you, Abu Hurairah? Why are you only eating 1 of the dates? Why are you trying to hide the other? He said, Ya Rasulullah, this one's for my mother. Your bir. يعني لن تنالوا البر يعني هي برا بوالديه John the Baptist, Yahya bin Zakaria, Isa bin Maryam alayhi salam, bir to the mother, mashallah, tabarakallah. This one's for my mother. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, eat it. Class, here's 2 for your mother. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, look what it is in Hadratul Nubuwah. Just to be in the presence of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Shuf, this Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu warda is not going to die until he's of the most wealthiest of the companions. Akada. But what the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam wants for his companions is that you're of those people who does not desire the dunya. They say there are 4 types of people. There are people who don't desire the dunya and the dunya don't desire them. There are people who desire the dunya, but the dunya don't desire them. كثير من الناس هكذا يعني. They desire the world, but the world don't want to know them يعني whatsoever. But there are people who don't desire the dunya, and the dunya don't desire them. Or there's people who do desire the dunya, and the dunya don't desire them. But there's people who don't desire the dunya, but the dunya desires them. And there are those who do desire the dunya, and the dunya desires them. Which one of the four cornerstones are you? Inshallah, tabarakallah. What the Prophet ﷺ wants us, ala kulli hal, period, whether we have dunya or whether we don't have dunya, is that we do not desire dunya. Hakada he wants sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Hakada rubbu, sahaba are raised upon that. They don't desire the dunya, and whether it comes or whether it doesn't come, sawasiya indahum. It's the same with them, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum warda'an. Sayyidina Abu Hurairah, Abdurrahman ibn Sakhr, wa mashallah, tabarakallah, Imam Al-Azim, radiyallahu Abu Hurairah. Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. So he relates to tradition here, which is on the authority of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Al-Iman bid'un wa sittuna shu'bah, wal-haya shu'batun min al-Iman. In which he says faith is bid'a wa sittuna shu'bah. Obviously what Imam Al Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala wants to show us is that faith is of degrees. Because the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam here inside the tradition here, that it's 60 odd branches. Like Imam Al Bayhaqi rahimahullah ta'ala is going to immortalize the branches of faith here. It's based upon this tradition. 60 odd branches in the version Sahih Muslim, 70 odd branches of faith. Okay? What Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala wants for you to understand, if there are branches of faith, degrees of faith, then faith must increase the higher you climb the tree. The higher your faith becomes. Hakada he wants from this tradition, radiallahu ta'ala an, who are not ultimately inside of the context of the tradition in and of itself. Al-Iman bid'ah. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said faith is bid'ah. And the ulama radiallahu anhum wardahum, they'll go to lengths for us to try to understand what is the term that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used. And it's not just sufficient that we can translate it as 60 odd. But what is the odd here? What does the bid'ah in the Arabic language mean? And you find context because it's the term that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala employs in several places inside of his book. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as an example, he employs it inside of Surah Al-Rum, Alif Lam Mim, Ghulibat Al-Rum, Adna Al-Ard, وهم من بعد غالبهم سيغلبون يعني Adna Al-Ard, في بضع سنين, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, in بضع سنين. Very famous, the occurrence of what happened with Rome and Persia. The meaning of Surah Al-Rum here, the 30th chapter of the Quran. It gives us an interpretation of what does the term bid'ah mean. And ultimately, the ulama radiallahu anhum warda'an, they say bid'ah ordinarily, that bid'ah is between 3 to 9. So it's, in Arabic, when we use the word bid'ah, it means any number between 3 and 9. Of them, they say between 3 and 10. Of them, they say between 4 and 9. Of them it be 1 and 9. Of them between 2 and 10. There are different opinions as to what does bid'ah mean in and of itself. What is the best way to understand it? Fil waqi'. Like one of the great imams of Lugha. His name is Khalil ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi, rahimahullah ta'ala. The Shaykh of Sibawayh, radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda. His opinion that the word bid'ah, it means 7. 7. And you can find that in the Kitaab of Allah Ta'ala, and you can find that also in the Kitaab of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. You find the book of Allah Ta'ala. Example in Surah Al-Rum. And so Surah Al-Rum, where Allah Ta'ala says, Ghulibat al-Rum, that the Romans have been defeated. Adna al-Ard, in a nearby land or in the lowest part of the earth. If you want to go into the issues of miracles inside of the book of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدَ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ in qira'at of the Quran. And after their defeat, they shall be victorious, or after their defeat, they shall be vanquished. Hakada the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in one of its reading, and that will also be went into that sort of tributary that relates to what you call the rise and fall of Rome. As the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Bukhari, he said, "Lir-Rum shatahat," that Rome has shatahat, rise, fall, rise and fall, up until the end of time. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that ar-Rum yakun akthar an-nas. Then there will be the majority of the people at the very end of time. The Prophet ﷺ said. And so here, after their defeat of the Persians, that they would what? They would once again be victorious Rome. And obviously it relates to the end of the Meccan period, where Rome and Persia, they fight inside the lower Levant. They go to war inside of the lower Levant. And inside of Mecca al Mukarramah, the actual mushrikeen of Mecca, they're all rooting for Persia. Why? The Persians are idolaters, just like the mushrikeen of Mecca are idolaters. So they're rooting for the victory of Persia. Whereas the Muslims are rooting for the victory of Rome. Why? Because Christians of the Abrahamic faith, so they're rooting for the victory of the actual what? Christians. And so what happens when they go to war? Persia wins. Persia emerges victorious. And so it's quote-unquote party time in Mecca till Mukarramah looks amongst the mushrikeen. And so the mushrikeen, the idolaters, are saying to the Muslims that look how Persia has defeated what? Rome. And when we go to battle with Jews likewise, shirk will be victorious, yani. Like the idolatry will be victorious. How they say? What? And so Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wardah, ghar yani, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wardah, ghirat ad-din. Okay, it's possessive nature of the religion. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wardah says, kadhabtum, you liars, yani. You know, we go to war, we will emerge victorious. Hakada, lisan al-sidq hada, saying Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wardah. And so it came to pass, yani. Hakada this Ubay ibn Khalaf, and most have it as the only man who the Prophet ﷺ kills. Ubay ibn Khalaf inside of Uhud. The Prophet kills him in Uhud. Although he injures him in Uhud, he dies straight after Uhud as a result of the injury. Yeah? Ubay ibn Khalaf in the famous traditional Jumahi. And so this Ubay ibn Khalaf al-Jumahi, he approaches Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and Abu Bakr, he contesting with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq on this fact. And so Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said, we put a wager upon him. Wager. 10 camels. We're going to put 10 young spring camels upon it each. And when they go to war again, who will win? Araftum. And so Abu Bakr leaves. And he goes and informs the Prophet ﷺ of what he is doing. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, Abu Bakr, well, what was the wager for you? The wager, the Prophet Allah Ta'ala says, fi bid'a sineen. Okay? In bid'a sineen, Abu Bakr, he placed the wager upon 3 years. 3. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says bid'a. He didn't say 3, he said bid'a. And bid'a in the riwayah, maduna tis'a, the Prophet ﷺ, beneath 9. Bid'a, the Prophet ﷺ, in another riwayah, maduna ashara, beneath 10, the Prophet ﷺ said, go back to him and increase the wager and increase the term. And so Abu Bakr goes back to Ubay ibn Khalaf and he increases the wager. And he sees Ubay ibn Khalaf. Ubay ibn Khalaf says to him, shuf, you coming back to me now? Because now, khalas, you understand that you've lost the bet? Abu Bakr says, la, I want to increase the wager and increase the term. Ubay ibn Khalaf says, so what? He says 100 camels. Look, he's betting upon the sidq of Allah Ta'ala and the sidq of his Rasul. This is when betting was allowed. We increase it from 10 to 100 and we increase the period to 10 years. Riwayah to 9 years. It's going to happen within that period of time. And so they both increased the bet. Anytime saying Abu Bakr as-Siddiq would leave what's it called? Mecca al Mukarramah, Ubay ibn Khalaf is so confident that he's, Abu Bakr, where you going, where you going? We got a bet on, He was so eager for these 100 camels. Until it becomes clear the Sahaba are leaving for Hijrah, they're leaving to migrate. So Ubay ibn Khalaf now forces Abu Bakr before Hijrah to leave a guarantee of the wager. And so Abu Bakr leaves his son Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr. He leaves him as the guarantee that in the absence of Abu Bakr, his son Abdullah will pay the wager to Ubay ibn Khalaf. And hakada, Abu Bakr migrates to Medina to Munawwara. Now, this is Uhud. At the Battle of Uhud, Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr, Abdullah ibn Abi Quhafa, now he puts pressure upon Ubay ibn Khalaf. Says, hold up a minute, you leave in Mecca, we have a bet here, we have a bet that is still here, like 100 camels. And so Ubay ibn Khalaf, he leaves behind 100 camels in case he dies and what? It comes true what Abu Bakr has foretold. And it comes to pass, mashallah, tabarakallah. At Hudaybiyah, the ulama say, that's when Rome meet Persia once again at Hudaybiyah. And the Rasul is at Hudaybiyah, and news comes to the Prophet ﷺ that the Romans have been victorious over what? Over the Persians. That's bid'ah. Let's look at the term here. Bid'ah. Between 3 to 9. You also have to you find Surah Al-Rum. You find it in Surah Yusuf, likewise. In Yusuf, as-Siddiq, this great truthful one, al-Sirat al-Haqq fil ard radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda, when those two inside of the jail, that they with Sayyidina Yusuf, and they have these dreams. Of the opinions of the Imams, they're only messing with Yusuf. They don't even have a dream. just playing around with Sayyidina Yusuf. That's of the opinions of the Imam, that they're messing around. And then khalas, so they mentioned these two scenarios with Sayyidina Yusuf. One of them he's pressing wine, and the other one he's prostrate, bears eating from his head. The two dreams or supposed dreams that they have. And that which you ask about, your affairs be decided. Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam says, regardless of whether it's true or whether it's false. That's why you should understand in the Tariq of Al Bukhari that the Prophet ﷺ said, Al Bukhari relates to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Al Bala mu'akkal bil mantiq, that tribulations are always tied to what you say. So you should always be careful of what you say. Especially when you go into Imams, you go into Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, are you lying on Yusuf? Said, I had this dream, and he never had this dream. And somebody go, people can't get, I saw the dream, and I thought the Prophet ﷺ said, Danny, you for real, Yani? If it for real, you saw the Rasul side for real. But many people, how can they can be? Okay, human being, come on. On the contradictions of man, he can contradict reality in and of himself. I mean, be careful of lies. Nothing more odious to Allah Ta'ala than Rasul Sallallahu than lying. Like there's a man who goes to Ibn Sirin. He goes to the great Imam Ahmad ibn Sirin from the house of Anas ibn Malik. Muhammad ibn Sirin radiallahu anhu warda. And he says to Ibn Sirin radiallahu ta'ala anhu warda, he said that I saw a dream. And in this dream, I saw a glass container suspended in the air. And inside the glass container, there was water. Then the glass container shattered, he says to Ibn Sirin, and the water remained inside of its place. Really amazing dream, innit? Ibn Sirin said, you're a liar. You never saw any such dream, Daddy. He just says, Ibn Sirin off the bat said, you're a liar. You never saw any such dream. Because the Imam of Dreams said. Why? Because the ulama, they extrapolate from that, from the qawa'id of dreams, from the principles of dreams, that dreams, they cannot, I'm using our language, they cannot contradict scientific rules. They can't contradict scientific rules. How can the ulama say? And what so they say Ibn Sirin, the Hukm Ibn Sirin, what you saw contradicts. It contradicts that. And so khalas, that wasn't a dream, you're lying. Ibn Sirin says, but khalas, whatever. You've said it, Yari, so I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. How can Ibn Sirin says? He said, your wife, pregnant. Your wife's pregnant. She's going to give birth to a child. Your wife's going to die, the child will live. How can Ibn Sirin says to him? And so it came to pass. Like Ibn Sirin, he interpreted the lie. You get the point? That al-bala mu'akkal bil-mantiq. And so likewise with Sayyidina Yusuf here, Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, that whether they were telling the truth or whether they weren't, the ulama are odds in that regard, he interpretates the lie. And as for one of them, yani khalas, he's fi'lan. He's going to be crucified, and birds are going to be eaten from his head. They're going to be eaten from his head, and be pecking away at him. And as for the other one, I say that as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِلَّذِي ظَنَّ أَنُّ نَاجٍ مِّنْهُمَا, the one who the opinion was he was going to succeed, اذْكُرْنِي عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ. اذْكُرْنِي عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ. He said. The ulama debates about who says it, but on the opinion that Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam says in the hadith that corroborates it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَأَنْسَاهُ الشَّيْطَانِ فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. And so Satan made him forget, and he remained inside of the prison bid'a sinin, Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. The ulama say, what does bid'a mean? The Prophet interpreted 7 years. 7 years. From that point on, Sayyidina Yusuf now remains inside the prison for 7 years. What we want bid'a being 7. You got the point? Of the ulama radiallahu anhum, they make mention that Allah Ta'ala took Yusuf to account for udhkurni inda rabbika. Mention me with your Lord, meaning the king of Egypt, yani, Rabbika, with your Lord. That Allah Ta'ala took Yusuf to account for every single letter that he used in that statement. 12 letters he used. Udhkurni inda Rabbika. Yani, Dha, Kaf, Ra, Ain, Dal, Udhkur, Dha, Kaf, Ra, Nun, Ya, Ain, Nun, Dal, Ra, Ba, Kaf. 12 letters. So for each letter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes Yusuf to account for. So prior to that point, he was in jail for 5 years. After that point, Allah Ta'ala gave an extension of 7. So 12 years, 1 year inside of jail for each word he used. Because in the Rabbika man, yani, who is your Lord? Your Lord is Allah. Not any type of created being. هكذا Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants Jalla Jalalu ta'ala. Bid'a, 7. هكذا we want. And that's why Imam Bayhaqi and others, they speak about the 77 branches of faith. How you're going to get all the term? It's not 7. It is the word bid'a inside the Arabic language. So the bid'un was situna here, that it's 76, or whatever you want to interpret bid'ah to be, branches, or it's what, as in the version side of Sahih Muslim, that it's what? It's 77 or 70 odd branches, the Prophet ﷺ said. In the version of Sahih Muslim, again in our mafhum, our understanding of faith, in that faith as we can, and we'll just repeat it over and over again so we do get the point. The faith does relate to the heart, the faith does relate to the mind, and faith likewise does relate to the limbs. And that in terms of deeds that manifest in the heart, the mind, and the limbs, the deeds of the heart are the greatest of deeds, just like the sins of the heart are the greatest of sins. And thereafter comes the mind. The deeds, the good deeds of the mind are the greatest of deeds, whereas the sins of the mind are beneath the sins of the heart, but greater than the sins of the limbs. And the good of the limbs are what are less than the actual good of the mind. Everyone got it? In that order, that's very, very important. So in the tradition side of Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ explains that when he says, faith is 70 odd branches, he says, وَأَدْنَاهَا, and the lowest of them, إِمَاتَةُ الْأَذَى عَنِ الطَّرِيقِ, is when you move a harmful object from the tariq, from the road. It's a physical act. When you do something physical, albeit that you're removing something harmful from the actual street so nobody will hurt by that or by that object, that is a branch of faith, but it's the lowest of them. And what you're also extrapolating from it, physical deeds are on the lower echelon of the varying degrees of faith. وَأَعْلَاهَا, and the highest of them, لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. It's La ilaha illallah, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. La ilaha illallah from the heart. Like Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu wardan, Rawi of the hadith. He said, he asked the Prophet, in Ibn Khuzaymah, he asked the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, يعني من أسعد الناس بشفاعتك يوم القيامة يا رسول الله. Who is the happiest person, the most felicitous person upon the day of judgment due to your shafa'ah, due to your intercession, O Messenger of God? Look at the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, I knew nobody would ask that question before you, Ya Abu Hurairah. Look, sure. I can't have shown the estimation of Abu Hurairah in his eyes. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Nobody would ask that question before you, Ya Abu Hurairah. And then the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam said, أسعد الناس بشفاعتي يوم القيامة من قال لا إله إلا الله خالصا من نفسه يعني قلبه. It's the one who articulates لا إله إلا الله, but is coming out of pure sincerity from the depths of his soul. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, هو أعلاها. That is the highest of them, mashallah, tabarakallah. لا إله إلا الله عظيم, يعني. لا إله إلا الله. But there's a farq, there's a farq. Like one of our teachers, one of our teachers mentions that he met a man, subhanAllah, he said he met a man, and this man had been in khalwa. He'd been in khalwa, khalwa? I've been in khalwa 10 days, the type of khalwa. Although it's not really much of a khalwa, enough man around those, but like, khalwa, you seclude yourself. One of our shuyukh, he said he sat with a man who was in khalwa by himself for over 30 years. 30 years, subhanallah. Al-Jazuli, Muhammad al-Jazuli, he did khalwa 14 years in Fars there. When Jazuli emerged from khalwa, he said the entire Fars made tawbah to Allah Ta'ala on the ru'yah of al-Jazuli. This gaze when the whole of the city of Fars made tawbah to Allah Ta'ala, just seeing the nur, the light of al-Jazuli after khalwa for 14 years. Sure. Our teacher, he met somebody over 30 years inside the khalwa. He said, when I was speaking to this man, he said, the man was illumined. And so I was describing to the man maybe some of the things that he'd missed whilst he was in khalwa, which is these khawarij have all that, these people running around here saying that Allah Ta'ala is a man and all that type of stuff, these funny people. And so he said, I'm describing these people who are upon the minbar speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he said, the sheikh says to him, يقولون لا إله إلا الله. He said, did they say La ilaha illallah? He said, نعم يقولون لا إله إلا الله. He said, يقولون لا إله إلا الله. He said, do they say La ilaha illallah? These people who believe that they have erroneous beliefs about Allah Ta'ala. Do they say La ilaha illallah? He said, Ya Sayyidi, يقولون لا إله إلا الله. They say La ilaha illallah. And he said, the man just returned back to himself, the Shaykh, saying, يقولون لا إله إلا الله. These people say La ilaha illallah. He said, Ya Sayyidi, يقولون لا إله إلا الله. They say La ilaha illallah. And he said, the Shaykh then says to him, هناك فرق. He said, there's a difference between those who say La ilaha illallah and those who are La ilaha illallah. Farq. And many a person can utter La ilaha illallah. Araftum, main al farq. And that farq there, the reality of the farq is that you immerse yourself in Muhammad Rasulullah. That's the farq. Faqat yaqulun La ilaha illallah. But they don't understand La ilaha illallah as Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam taught us to understand La ilaha illallah. Hakada yawm al-qiyamah. In that mawqif al-rahib, yani, in that sort of great terrifying moment when Sayyidina Malik, Khazanat al-Nar, the guardian of hell, yani Khazan al-Nar, he takes hold of a fauj, he takes hold of people, yani, and he wants to cast them inside of hell. As he wants to cast them inside of hellfire, يقولون لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله. They begin to shout لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله. Jibreel alayhi salam, when he hears them shouting La ilaha illallah, Jibreel alayhi salam says to Malik, يقولون لا إله إلا الله. They say La ilaha illallah. They're saying La ilaha illallah. Gabriel says. Malik alayhi salam says, Amarani Rabbi, my Lord has commanded me. Cast them into hell. هكذا. يقولون لا إله إلا الله. They say La ilaha illallah. And the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, min samim qalbika, La ilaha illallah, from the depths of your heart, yani. Once it's from the depths of your heart, as the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has said, akhlis niyataka, yani khalas. So long as you're sincere in your heart, yakfika amal al-qalil ya Mu'adh. That what very few deeds will suffice you. Look at the tradition, Yawm al-Qiyamah. It's mudhak, yani. That is Yawm al-Qiyamah. That man there, yani, Raf stands in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah ta'ala tells in the Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Allah ta'ala tells the angels bring forth his scrolls, his book of deeds. So they bring forth the scrolls. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, 99 scrolls. He has 99 scrolls, deeds, yeah, 99 scrolls. And then what? Allah ta'ala commands for the scrolls to be extended. And then the scrolls are extended. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِلَى مَدِّ الْبَصَرِ. Mad al-Basar, to what we call the horizon, that imaginary point. Yeah, it's going gone, like quote unquote, seemingly infinite. His scrolls. Then the scrolls are commanded to be read. Every single thing upon the scroll, on the scroll is what? Bad, evil. Yani. My man getting busy in the dunya, yani, with evil. Yani. That's what Allah salam alafiyah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then through the angel said, is this yours? He says, Ya Rab, this is mine. Allah ta'ala says that the hafadha, the angels, Raqib al-Atid, مَا ظَلَمَاكَ. Yani مَا ظَلَمَاكَ, they never like wronged you, yani, araftum, like they were writing, yani khalas, Atid was busy writing things when he shouldn't have been writing things. La. He says, La ya Rab, مَا ظَلَمَانِ. And they never wronged me. All of this is mine. You haven't got no good. Hakada, it is what you see, Ya Rab. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, بَيْنَهُ كَذَلِكَ, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, whilst it's in that state, in that conversation with angels, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, al-bitaqa. Bitaqa, it falls min taht al-arsh. It comes from beneath the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As bitaqa, whatever you understand it, but it can be used in the Arabic language for like, you know, your identity card. Although the meaning here is a raka'. The meaning here is just like a scrap of paper. But it can be used for like your identity card. And so the angels take hold of this piece of paper which is attributed to the man, and on it says, La ilaha illallah. Hakadar it says upon it. And so Allah Ta'ala says, weigh it against the scrolls. The man says, weigh it against what scrolls, Yani? 99 scrolls, that is infinite, Yani, khalas, against this little scrap of paper. Weigh it upon the scrolls, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala says. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, they put the scrolls, 99 of them, upon one side, and they put this scrap of paper upon the other side. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, فَطَارَتُ الصُّحُفِ, that the scrolls and just flew into the air and dissipated. وَثَقُلَتِ الْبِطَاقَةِ. And the actual scrap of paper became heavy. Kayf, why did it become heavy? It's a contradiction. I know it's a contradiction for many of us. That there are some people, yani, they have, how can we call it? They can have, I'm making up the term here, okay? It's not a lie, I'm just trying to find a term to express this. This is positive. If there's such a thing as positive hypocrisy, this is positive hypocrisy. You know positive hypocrisy, yani? Inwardly, they're with Allah, outwardly, they're somewhere else, yani. You get the point? Because hypocrisy is when there's a contradiction between outward and inward, yani. Ordinarily, it's inward is bad, outward is seemingly good. But there are people that ask tamam, yani. Arafat? And it came to mind, we mentioned yesterday, Ayub Sikhtiyani. They said you'd go into the house of Ayub Sikhtiyani, and he'd have we'd call like a really nice couch, all nice decor and all of that. Arafat? People come in like, wow, man, Ayub living well, yani. Ayub living fat, yani. And then people, yani, who got the moment when he didn't expect them coming, they would see beneath all of that decor, it was all roughness. You just get rid of it and put that in the corner. You get the point? So inwardly, it was khushan, yani. He lived a rough life. But he didn't want people to see that, yani. So when they come to him, he would decorate the house as if he was living fat, yani. Radiallahu ta'ala. And hakada people can be. And the scrolls of the ulama, radiallahu anhum, what they say is that the scrolls, they recognize what is written by angels. But there is something beyond the angels that is only known to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As in Kitaab al-Zuhd of Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Mubarak, on the seventh heaven, when the deeds of that man come to the angel of Ikhlas, an angel of Ikhlas in the seventh sky, and the seventh sky is the angel of faith, the sky of faith. That's what the sky of the seventh realm is. And so he comes to the sky of faith here, and then the angel said, what's it, man, don't prayer, fasting, zakah, hajj, amr al-ma'ruf, nahi al-munkar, dhikr Allah ta'ala. He said all of this was not done for Allah ta'ala's sake. Ana malak al-ikhlas. I'm the angel of ikhlas. Take these deeds, return it back to him, and beat him upside the head with his own deeds. This doesn't get past me. Hakada. And then the Prophet ﷺ goes on to mention that now the deeds ascend once again. Prayer, fasting, charity, hajj, amr bil ma'ruf, nahi al munkar, dhikr Allah ta'ala. And when the angel of Ikhlas sees it, angel of Ikhlas gives it a pass. And so the deeds go in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Same deeds that have been passed, they've got the stamp of Ikhlas upon. And when they get in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah ta'ala says, who do you think I am? These deeds were not done for my sake. And so the ulama say that there's that which the angel knows and is conscious of, that he can record, but there's something يَعْلَمُ سِرَّ وَالْأَخْفَى. Allah Ta'ala knows that which is secret and that which is even more well hidden. Subhana. That nobody accesses but him. Subhana. And that's why you understand here with the man, all of his scrolls, just deeds and deeds and deeds of sin. But there's something that is known to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, min taht al-arsh. It comes from beneath the soul, beneath the throne. What is that? The sir of La ilaha illallah that was inside of his heart. Shuf kayf. It's a strange tradition, isn't it? That somebody there can be at the highest degree of ikhlas there inside of his heart with La ilaha illallah. But look at the circumstance. That everything that he did was a sin. The least we get from that, don't think, yeah, man, I got a chance. No, that's if you want a different bad day. The least you get from that, always have good opinions of sinners. Yeah? Always have a good opinion of a sinner. Because you do not know him. You do not know her whatsoever. Leave that to Rabb, to the Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hakada. Inshallah, we ask Allah ta'ala for tawfiq. Al-Iman bid'ah sittuna shu'bah, wal-haya shu'batan al-Iman. Modesty is also a branch of faith. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said there's going to be a chapter of modesty. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll look at that inshallah ta'ala later. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah.